So great. Good evening, everybody. And thanks for joining this session on data science. What's in it for LSP and language technology companies organized by Sitlab. My name is Sudhir. I am president of Crystal Use, a complete communication lifecycle company that creates and localizes content in any language and delivers it in any technology. This session will be moderated by Sandeep Nulkar, founder of Bits India, one of the leading translation and localization company in India. I will request the audience to send their questions uh, in the chat, along with their name and company name. Before we begin the session, I would like to give you a brief introduction on Kalika Bali, who has kindly agreed to share her knowledge and experience on the topic that is vexing practically everyone who needs to communicate to multilingual communities. Kalika Bali is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research India, working broadly in the area of speech and language technology, especially in the use of linguistic models for building technology that offers a more natural human-computer as well as computer-mediated interactions, and technology for low-resource languages. She has been in the field of speech and natural language processing for over 2 decades and believes that local language technology, especially with speech interfaces, can help millions of people gain entry into a world that is still now almost inaccessible to them. Thank you, everyone. And over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you so much, Sudhir, and welcome once again, Kalika. I think this session or this webinar has really generated a lot of interest. We have actually more sign-ups than the last time, despite the fact that this topic is very difficult for a layperson to understand. And probably that's one of the reasons why we have sign-ups. People want to know more. In fact, I got a couple of my questions from participants itself, and they were curious to know. So I was more than happy to include those. So I think like the structure is, we will have a set of questions, and of course, it's a informal chat. So if you want to branch out and say something else, that's fine too. And then in the end, we'll take questions. So first of all, I just wanted you to tell everyone what your role as a principal researcher at Microsoft actually is. What kind of research do you do, and what really are the outcomes that one looks at?
Sure. So Microsoft Research is a very different entity from the rest of Microsoft. So we are kind of um, a pure research unit of Microsoft. Um, in some ways, we are not very different from, say, a computer science department in a university, right?
Okay.
And most of the people that work in MSR actually are faculty, visiting faculty or adjunct faculties in a lot of institutes around the world. We work with other professors, guide students on their research, etc. We teach in lots of places, but within Microsoft, our role, and that includes me, all researchers' role, is to um, think of what is going to be important in the long term. So we don't really focus on the problems here and now. Um, that's not really our mandate. That's not our job, because there are a huge number of really smart people within the company who solve the problems of here and now. Right. Our job is to think, place the bets, like, this is what we think is going to be important in our field 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line,
Right.
sometimes even 15 years down the line. Right? This is like the forward thinking branch of Microsoft, and we work towards that. We kind of place our bets on it. We have our research agenda, and we try to make that vision of what um, the world is going to be like, technologically speaking, 5 years or 10 years down the line, and work towards it. So we are researchers. We research, we kind of create prototypes, create possibilities, of what technology can do, where technology can be in the future. Um,
ಫ್ರೀ
and the
ಮಾಸ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ
and
ಸಿಕ್ತಲ್ವಾ
the impact that we have can obviously be on the company. A lot of the work that Microsoft Research has done, is doing, goes into actual Microsoft products. But that's not all. The impact that we have can be on the scientific community, just pushing the science forward. If you pick up any area of computer science, you will find some Microsoft researcher or the other has been involved in whatever is the cutting edge technology or science there, right from theory, computer science theory, to the most practical applications, etc. People have been pushing the envelope on that. And another impact that we, especially in the lab in India, that we are very conscious of is like a societal impact. How do we actually have a social impact with what we are doing? How do we make people's lives better with what we're doing? So that's the kind of scenario in which I work in. That's the context in which I live my work life.
Can you give us a practical example of some research that you have done that's applied? As in, has it made my life easier?
It might not have made your life easier, but it might have made somebody else's life easier.
I'm just representing the common person who's using the internet, who has no idea of what technology is doing to their own experience.
So the speech things that we take for granted now, right? Like talking to our voice assistants. It could be like Cortana or Siri or Google Voice or whatever. Do you know that Microsoft was the first company to release a speech API in 1995 for the very first time? Right? And there was a huge group of speech researchers who worked very closely with the product groups to make that happen. Right? Machine translation, some of I know that you had mentioned about Google Translation, etc. But even before that, Microsoft translation systems were out there, creating that community around that. In our lab, particularly, some of the things that we are extremely proud of is on the social impact side. So there was a project called 99 Dots that came out of Microsoft Research Lab India, which dealt with tracking and monitoring TB medication among students. That thing became such a huge thing. It's now spun out as a company, and the government is kind of collaborating and making this happen so that you can track TB patients effectively. So there are lots and lots of such things that came out of Microsoft research and went there. So a lot of your Xbox speech thing, how you can like play games and talk to the machine and wave your hand and make things happen, came from Microsoft Research's work. They were founded in that.
Great. You've been doing this for a long time now, and clearly there is a lot of change happening within the industry today. So do you see your role having changed significantly over the last couple of years, especially over the last couple of years? And how do you see the changing language and language technology landscape in India? Because as opposed to 2 years ago, I see a lot of technology coming into the language industry. Language technology companies were probably unheard of 5 years ago. And now they're mushrooming everywhere. Everyone's trying to solve some problem which is related to languages. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, and it actually makes me very happy. So I'll tell this like as a personal journey kind of a thing. So I moved to Bangalore in 2002 from London. I was working in a startup in London working on English language speech technology, right? Um, and I was moved to this small startup that four professors from Indian Institute of Science had got together called Simputer. It was a handheld computer, and they wanted to have some speech abilities, and they wanted me to work on that. At that time, there was no data. I came back like very excited because I really wanted to work on Indian languages. So I came back really excited wanting to do this. And at that time, there was no data available at all. There was zero data in any Indian language for me to work with, right? Um, I worked in HP Labs. We built speech systems in Indian language. At that time, there was no taker for those systems, right? I still maintain that we had some of the, we were way ahead of our times. We had some of the most excellent speech recognition and speech synthesis systems at that time. I'm talking about 2003, 2004. But there was no ecosystem to consume those. Nobody knew what to do with it. We couldn't like say, okay, here we have this wonderful technology. Now go ahead and use it. There was no one who knew how to use it. The infrastructure was not there, right? Um, Even in the initial years in Microsoft, I have stood and argued for Indian language technology, Indian language technology, Indian language technology all the time. And, you know, most of the time, the feeling was there is no market. Nobody knows how to use these things. And suddenly, in the last 5 years, that's completely changed. And I think we have the mobile phone to thank for that. The way the mobile penetration has happened in this country, like just leapfrogging every other technology, and the way people have taken to these kind of interactions. Everybody now wants everything in Indian language, right? You want retailers want to sell you in Indian language interfaces. People want to talk to each other in Indian language things. Earlier it was like, okay, if you're sending SMS and texts, etc., you have to be an English language user, and that's no longer true. And I think that's fantastic. We're still not out there. We still have a long way to go, but I definitely am very thrilled about this change in the industry and in the society.
No, I think you're absolutely right in the sense we've gone from a couple of 100 million online users to more than 800 million online users. Most of them preferring to interact with technology in their language. So I think it's a paradigm shift from what it was a few years ago. I just want to ask you one quick question, which is kind of related, kind of unrelated. The industry today believes that voice, video, and vernacular are the future of content in India. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And what are your reasons?
So I do believe voice and vernacular is the future of India. I'm not too sure about video. I don't really know that much about that area. I see a lot of work in that area. I see that a lot of people make that claim. I personally have very little expertise or knowledge about that thing. But I have always believed, this is not now. For 20 years, I've believed that voice and vernacular is the future for Indian language technology industry. Because for several reasons. One reason is definitely that literacy levels are still not high enough for people to be able, for everyone to be able to use text. Yeah? Not everyone can read and write fluently. There might be, even when we say that someone is literate, that might just mean that they're able to sign their name, right? Or they might have very limited literacy, not enough to kind of use these applications and this technology. So that's one reason why I think voice is important. The second reason I think vernacular is important is, just get away from the main cities and see what is the language. Even people who might have education in English, know English, what is the language in which people communicate? What is the language in which people interact with each other? What is the language in which you go and ask your grocery person for your rations?
Yeah.
Right? What is the language you use to go buy your tickets? Just move out of these Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Pune, Chennai kind of a thing, and just see what people use. So most people want to use these technologies in their own languages, and voice is the most natural way. I mean, spoken language is the most natural way in which humans communicate. The other reason why spoken language is important is that our keyboards are very clunky even now. Just the way our languages, our scripts are, nobody has really found a very effective way that allows us to type
Yeah.
as well as we can speak.
Correct. Correct. So voice and vernacular. Now, that's what brings us to the crux of today's webinar, which is all these fancy words. And very honestly, I have seen these words being used more from a marketing perspective. So anyone comes out with an application, uh, they are honestly itching to use the word AI or
Yeah.
ML so that they look like they have really come out with a very effective solution. But I really want you to explain, this is something that has come from quite a few participants, as in, can you just put everything in perspective and tell us, what's the big daddy, who's connected to whom, in what way, big data, artificial intelligence, ML, NLP, and how does a common person in layperson's terms understand these technical terms, so to say?
Okay. So I think it is confusing. I don't blame anyone who says like, I really don't get this. It is confusing because it's very overlapping between, say, AI, ML, and data science. People kind of use them very interchangeably, and people use them very loosely as well. The way I would think about it, in a very simple term, is AI has to do with creating machines
Mhm.
that have some human functionality,
Okay.
human-like functionality.
Mhm.
Machines that can like make logical reasonings, logical connections, machines that can learn, machines that can interpret and decide based on that learning. So AI kind of focuses on that. Now, general AI is what people kind of understand as this, science fiction kind of thing.
Mhm.
Machines taking over the world kind of scenarios are painted from a general AI. So general AI would be like the closest to mimicking a human ability, mimicking human abilities,
Okay.
right? Um, we are not there yet. We are very, very far from general AI. People are working on it. People are, pushing things. It's a hard problem
Mhm.
because it's also hard for us to even understand how humans get these functionalities, right?
Correct.
Like now to kind of model them for a machine, it's a harder thing. What we have been very successful in the past few years is this narrow AI. How can we build machines which have human-like functionalities for specific tasks in specific domains or in specific modalities, right? And there we have been very successful, and there are several reasons for it. Now, so AI doesn't necessarily have to be only about data science, right? There can be other kind of modeling done, which is not big data dependent, right? There can be knowledge-based modeling for AI. So AI is much more general, and its goal is to mimic human functionality. Now, from there, if we go to machine learning is mostly think of it as a tool. Machine learning is a set of algorithms
Right. Mm.
which take some kind of data as input and learn from it.
Okay.
Okay, and then they are able to then allow machines to process data in a certain manner.
Mhm.
So machine learning is exactly that. It's um, data input according to what your task is. Your algorithm will cluster the data in a certain way, pull out data in a certain way, predict things in a certain way based on what data is fed to it. Data science, I think of it as more like a practical thing, though it isn't necessarily like you would say like data science is the science of data, and that's how loosely people use it. But the way people perceive it, the data science deals more with the practical applications of getting trends, understanding patterns from large amounts of data. Now, obviously, to do that, a human being can't sit with like gigabytes of data and try to analyze patterns, right? A machine can do it faster. So usually you use machine learning to come up with these interpretations or these insights from huge amounts of data. But data science normally is much more application oriented, whereas machine learning is more of an algorithm, and AI is more of like this high level reasoning and understanding. So that's the way I would put it as simply as I can.
Your passion has clearly lied and expertise has lied in NLP. So could you tell us a little about NLP too, and
Sure.
more importantly, how that might change the translation and localization industry in particular?
Sure. So so NLP, which I kind of left out. So NLP is more about how we can process languages, through machines. So NLP deals with things like taking in data, understanding data, and also generating data. So processing data, data understanding, and data processing, language data, right? Not any data, language data. And then so we have language models which allow us to do that. And in the recent past, these language models have become very powerful because the computing infrastructure that we have is more powerful than it ever was. And the amount of data we have available to us has also increased tremendously, and that allows us to kind of do amazing things with these models, process as well as understand as well as generate. Now, what implications does it have for the localization and translation industry? Has to do with two things. Translations, automatic translation will become much better and much more powerful, right? With these kind of models, scaling across languages will become easier, right? Will it make humans redundant?
Yeah, that's the question.
Probably not. But these things can assist humans to translate more effectively. So I will give you an example. We at MSR India have this collaboration with Pratham Books. I don't know if people here know about Pratham Books, but they are like a not-for-profit children's book publisher. They publish books in more than 100 languages right now, right? So so we were having this project with them, and they said they don't want an automatic machine translation system for books because they want to control things in a certain way, right? Like these are children's books, they are story books. They want the narrative to be in a certain way. They want to have reading levels maintained in a certain way, etc., etc. And they want it to be the experience to be consistent across different languages.
Right.
But they want something that will help. So they have like this pool of voluntary as well as paid translators who do this, right? And they want them to be able to do this more effectively. They want help for them. So we came up with something, you know, after hearing what they were talking about and like talking to a few translators, looking at the kind of data, etc., that they had. So we came up with something called the interactive neural machine translation tool. So now this is a tool that has at its back end, you know, the powerful deep learning neural models for machine translation. But what it does is that as the person translates a sentence, it gives predictive suggestions, you know, like you do in your mail, right?
Correct.
Like as you're typing in English, they
Yeah.
suggest the next thing, but it keeps
Correct.
changing as you can
Right.
accept it or like ignore it and keep
Correct.
typing. Now we allow users to do this, translators to do this across languages. So you know, if you're going from English to Hindi, it'll keep predicting the Hindi sentence as you type, and you can suggest take the suggestion or like ignore it, and you know, depending on how good it is or what you think is more appropriate, or whatever your own reasons for it. Now that uses NLP, that uses machine translation, automatic machine translation models, that uses very powerful technology at the back end, but it is to help the humans. So I think the most effective technology or the most effective use of even AI is where we empower the humans. You know, we empower the humans in the loop rather than, you know, take them out of the loop. And this by the way, like I'm just letting people know this for um, their benefit, is like um, this tool is available on GitHub in open source. So if you have
Okay.
yeah, so if people want to kind of play around with it, the only models we've put out are Hindi English because that's what we worked with. But if
Right.
people want to build their own models and plug them, that entire tool, everything is available um, in open source.
I'm just going to circle back to what you said a little earlier, that it would probably assist humans and not replace them. I have a slightly different take on that, and I just wanted your opinion on that. So I've always believed that machine translations will not replace humans as long as humans are at least as good as machine translations. So would you agree with that? Because we are finally looking at a scenario where uh, machine translation output is going to get better and better. So does that mean there'll be fewer jobs, but those would be premium jobs? Because that's how a
That's
lot of.
quite possible. That can happen. That at least for basic translations, you probably will not need um,
Correct.
um, you know,
Correct.
humans. There might be you know, specialized domains in which you will always need uh, humans. Uh, Also, like if you think of you know, technology, if you think of this whole cycle that people talk about of replacing humans, technology replacing humans, it's actually happened all the time, right? In the history of humankind, and humans kind of find other things to do,
Of
right?
course.
Like coal mines shut down, but
Yeah.
other things happened. Horse carriages did not exist after some time, but you know, other things happened. So that some of it is part of like technology, co-evolution of humans and technology. But right now I think most of the machine translation is more useful as an assistive technology. And it also depends on how much data that you have and for what language. So if you're trying to do like say English German machine translation, you probably have very high quality data and therefore high quality systems. But if you want to do it for, I don't know, for English Marathi, you know,
There
the
isn't
system,
that much. Parallel corpora doesn't exist.
yeah, and also therefore the systems are also not that good.
Mhm. Now, a question closer home. You've been a part of the Project May Launch team. which is doing a lot of interesting work in code mixed languages. And we were talking about code mixed earlier before we started the webinar. Increasingly, with the digital revolution, colloquial conversations in most Indian languages are becoming code mixed. So, how do you foresee NLP and ML being useful in translating such content? Because especially in a country like India, we do speak code mixed. So,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah, so when we started working again, like, this is a popular refrain of mine, but when we started working on code mixing, we had a hard time convincing people that this was an important problem. Within India, a lot of people had this view that, oh, this is like bad kind of language. This is not how language should be used. There was a very prescriptive notion of language. So within India, people kind of ignored it because of that. Outside India, people thought, oh, this must be like something very India specific, right? Like, this is not something that we have to worry about. But the truth is that, this is code mixing happens in almost all societies where multilingualism exists at a societal level, right? And India is not the only place where this happens. There are supposed to be about, I don't know, 500. Well, at least half the world's population is supposed to be multilingual, right? So that's a huge population that code mixes. But slowly, so one of the experiences was when speech to speech translation came into being, and people started putting these out in the real world, and suddenly people realized that nobody really speaks only one language, and the systems were not working because the Spanish person at one end was not speaking pure Spanish. And the English person at the other end was trying to also be nice and try to put these Spanish words in the middle to kind of show some kind of affinity to the person. In India, it is not difficult to explain this to anyone. Everybody understands the importance. We see it all the time. We use it all the time. We see it now in newspapers. Like, I have examples of absolutely hardcore Hindi belt newspapers from Kanpur kind of areas where they actually have um, um, English mixed into an article, right? So this is if language technology is going to support people in the most natural way that they communicate, then this is the most natural way in which most of this country communicates. So you cannot ignore it. And this is not just about, English plus local language kind of mixing. It happens between any dominant language and other language in the country. So, if you move away from English, people mix other languages. In this country. So I think this is very important. A lot of people have been working on it now. A lot of systems can process slowly are beginning to process code mix language, understand code mix language. I think it's the way we are.
Yeah, at least in India, you can see it all around you. So
yeah, Spanish English, French and English in Canada, all of Southeast Asia, except like China, they don't mix much. But most of Southeast Asia, they mix. South Africa, Kenya, African places, lots of European nations. So it's only these very concentrated masses of monolingual English speaking areas where code mixing doesn't happen.
Okay. My next question is, whenever there's any path-breaking technology available, everyone wants to have a part of it, a piece of the pie, so to say. When machine translation technology happened, then of course Microsoft and Google actually made it possible for the common man to, access machine translations. Now, is there a way for language service companies with no in-house technical expertise to benefit from AI, ML, NLP? Are these, as in being open source is good enough, but you still need some amount of tech expertise to be able to leverage something like that. But are there any applications available in the language domain, or do you see something coming up that will allow probably smaller LSPs to benefit from this technology?
So I think there isn't much that is like directed towards LSPs, and that definitely is a space where there is a gap. But I do think that for most of the companies, at least for the big players who are working with machine translation, so for example, Google or Microsoft, they do provide APIs. They
Right.
provide different models in which their translation systems can be used by companies, small and big. So there is that, but is it like they're definitely not oriented towards a particular industry. Though the fact is that these services, the APIs, there is some cost involved after a certain volume, but more or less these are available at very reasonable cost, or like almost free of cost, the technology. It's not like done in a like a very high commercial return uh, point of view. So there is that, but I also think that a lot can be done within the country itself. There can be several, there are startups there, that there should be much more government involvement in supporting the ecosystem for SMEs, and even um, even smaller than SMEs. I don't know what it is, like cottage it used to be, but there should be much more support for that. I know people talk a lot about it, and there are certain initiatives that are happening, but I think this needs to be brought together and be much more focused. For the companies themselves who do not have technical expertise, um, a you really need very little technical expertise to use these technologies. And my suggestion would be to kind of invest in a little bit on personal development on that side. People pick it up very fast. You don't have to be. So one thing in our country is that everybody is scared that if I am not an engineer, I will not be able to do this. I'm not an engineer, and I'm here talking to you about all this, right? So I would suggest people not get scared of the technology, but try to I've seen many people who are able to do this. The other thing that I think people should also be worrying about, and I don't know if you were going to ask me this, but and I don't know how much more time we have, so I would like to say this. And I can see that Madhu and somebody else have asked something about data. Um, One of the reasons that in India we have to really worry about these technologies and providing user interfaces in vernacular or local language technology is the lack of data.
Right.
That is a big issue. That is the biggest bottleneck we have. We know how to build these things. We have knowledge within the country to build these things. We have a number of startups and commercial and non-commercial players who who can do this effectively. Believe me, we don't, there is no bottleneck on how to
On
solve
the
this problem.
technology side, it's on the
Yeah,
language side.
it is on the data side. We just do not have the data available, and there should be this uh, effort to share data in a meaningful way, right? So that everybody benefits from it, so
Right.
everybody can build on top of it. So that is like the biggest issue that we have in front of us. And then, obviously, if you're a commercial entity, you focus on where you're going to earn money,
Absolutely.
right? So you would focus on the 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe the all 22 languages that is going to get you money. But India has, over 100 languages which are of reasonable size,
Yeah.
right? Who's going to worry about them? Are we going to say that, okay, here is a set of citizens of this country who are special because they speak these languages, and we will create technologies only for them, and the rest of you, goodbye. When we have data, when we figure out something, we'll look at you, and you cannot access this technology. Are we going to create that kind of hierarchy, and are we going to create second and third class citizens within our country through technology, which is supposed to be this great equalizer?
Right. So that, yeah, I agree. That is a huge problem. As in, the absence of parallel corpora is something that the tech world has been complaining about for a long, long time. Uh, like, we are almost running out of time, and I wanted to open up the floor for questions. One last question, and you can probably be very brief in your answer. Uh, is there any advice that you would like to give uh, language service companies or language technology companies in particular in India,
Yeah.
from the perspective of NLP, since that is your area of expertise?
Sure.
Anything we can do to be, prepared for the future?
I think that the what I have found is that the expertise is not just on the technology side; it is on understanding who your users are.
Mhm.
And people who create generic technology like machine translation systems or language models do not know the users. They don't know your users. So you know how to get that knowledge you have about your users, and what they want, what their problems are, and how to solve those problems, and how to then use the technology that is coming up, machine translation, or whatever other interfaces, speech recognition, etc. How do you use that technology to solve your user's problem? Now that is the part that's going to become more and more important. We know how to do the technology part. The data might not be available, but we might eventually even get that solved. We might even have technology which is like as good at translating as any human. But this part of where the understanding, the domain expertise, the understanding of the user's needs, the problems that you're trying to solve, that's where I think the the gap will always lie.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Sudhin to get you some questions from the audience.
So thank you very much. And it's very encouraging to know that you don't need to be an engineer to really work with the technologies that's available. And you're very right. A nominal investment needs to be made, which I think most of the people involved in languages has always been adopting technologies that's available, whether it's the technologies like even MS Word. People didn't know before how to use
Yeah,
MS Word for their own
exactly.
typing languages, but they have adopted. And it's really very encouraging to know that you don't have to be an engineer to really use these technologies that you guys are developing. Wonderful, great. And I think most of our members would be very happy to really know this particular fact, because that's what is worrying them really. Okay, so I have requested if anybody would like to ask the question directly. All they have to do is just switch on their video and ask the question directly. But while we are waiting, I'll take the questions right from top. So Swati from All Language Bureau, Speak All Language Bureau, has asked, how would the data science differentiate? How would you differentiate the data science between languages and linguistics?
Language is the entire language that you speak, the entire system, right? Linguistics is like the study of that system. So linguistics is the science of language, how languages work in all its aspects, right? From how you produce sound, how you process sound, to how you make meaning out of sentences, how you build words. So linguistics is the science of language, and language is the actual system that we use for communicating.
Great. The other question is from Madhumita from Kartix. What is the difference between bias and variance
Variance.
distinguishing from supervised and unsupervised machine
Okay,
learning?
this is a hardcore machine learning
Yeah,
question. So I can, if you send me a message, I can point you to, um, because I would need to know how much you know about unsupervised and supervised machine learning. So
yeah.
I can point you to the right places to look at this.
And this is, so I'll take the next question. This is from Madhu from Simalingwe, which I think you caught on even before. So good data is important for data science. And how would you rate data availability for Indian languages? What is lacking and how can we, as language specialists, contribute to good data?
So what is lacking? How long do you have? I can
Just
do one whole session on what is lacking. No, we do not have, we actually have no data for a large percentage of our languages. Okay, even for the 22 eighth schedule languages, we do not have data for more than a few. Okay, whatever languages, Hindi is the most resourced language in the country, and the difference between Hindi and the next language, and I don't know if it's Tamil or Bangla, one of the two, is massive. Okay, um, what can language specialists contribute to good data? What would be really good if people want to do this is, like, everyone should come together, because if I sit in my one corner and create data, and you sit in your one corner and create data in silos, and then we create data in a way that our data sets don't speak to each other, it's actually of no use. And that is why we don't have enough data for languages, because people kind of worked in silos. One corner somebody did some data preparation, one corner somebody did some data preparation, and there was no coordination. So I think that one way could be if the LSPs themselves form a consortium of some sort and say that I know that data is valuable. I know that people cannot just go around sharing customer data, for example, right? But form a consortium where you say that, okay, we will put out a certain amount of data goals for a year, right? Like in these particular language pairs, maybe this much data we can put out. Maybe get other funding authorities involved in it. Say that, here we are, we can create this data, and tell us how we can help you. Talk to government as a single body and say that, you have plans for data collection. How can we contribute? you know how can you use our expertise to create this data? So I think it needs to be a bigger, more coordinated effort, while at an individual level we can keep translating more. We can go to say Pratham Books. I keep going there and translating books into whatever languages I know. That can only help in a very limited way. The problem we need to solve is big, so we all have to kind of come together and do something about it.
I just
Right.
have a kind of supporting question to this. Is it safe to presume that a company like Microsoft has already mined all the bilingual data there is on the internet for Indian languages? As it,
um
we at least completed that step.
No, so the thing is that Microsoft works in very different ways. So I can only speak for Microsoft. I can't speak for other companies.
Yeah.
So we have very, very strict data privacy and data regulations. We follow GDPR. So what we can use, we can't use. What we can mine, what we can't mine is very strictly governed. So it's I really cannot say that we would have done that. Secondly, we actually do use vendors for most of our products because we need like high quality data for commercial products. So we don't really. So if we were to kind of create a speech recognition system for Hindi, we would actually contract a vendor for doing that. So it would be a company, a language company would be doing that for us.
Just to add to that, a follow-on questions. How do you tackle the GDPR or data privacy? Because you're talking about forming a consortium, then you're talking about data sharing, and so how does this work? I'm sure most of us are working for customers. Uh, we have created corpus for managing their data specifically for them. But when you are saying we create a corpus and we probably make it public or we share it for even for research purposes, which probably if we go back to our customers, they might agree. But how do you handle that? Because data privacy is a very tricky issue.
Yeah, so some things are absolutely non-negotiable for us. So there can be absolutely no personal information. There's no PID in the data at all. There can't be a way for people to kind of reverse engineer information.
Okay.
So that is absolutely non-negotiable.
Okay.
The second thing is that kind of randomizing, anonymizing things. That's another way to deal with these issues. Another there are there is some work on how you can actually train machine learning models um, in an off eyes scenario. So the people who are training the models and building these systems don't actually see the data, but
Got it.
that's not applicable in the context that you're talking about. um, after GDPR, things have become very strict for us. It's impossible for us to kind of get any data which has any personal information.
Very nice. Thank
It's
you.
just not possible.
Yeah, it is, and I think rightly so also because data has
Yeah,
been. I mean, we have thousands and millions of instances where you could see the data being,
yeah.
misused.
And one thing more that I can add to that is that when you collect data, we have very strict IRB kind of rules. When you collect data from a person, the person who's giving you the data has to be absolutely um, clear about what the data is going to be used for. So we go to several rounds of these, MOUs, agreements that we sign with people who are providing data to make sure, like even for research, to make sure that
Okay,
they understand what the data is being used for, and we have their consent for it.
very
Yeah.
nice. Great. I think I'll just take this last quick question. I don't think it's going to take too much time. Uh, this is from Govind from Le Cours de Français, French Center. Uh, what are options in open source or free MT engines that are suitable for Indian languages or for small LSPs?
What are the options? So
Yeah.
most of these open source systems, so um, so for example, the Google and Microsoft translation systems are not open source, right? The APIs are provided. You can use the web thing, yes, but after a certain volume, you have to kind of pay for them, right? So they're not open source. Now, for the open source systems, like there's an OpenNMT system that's available. The models that they put out are they don't put out so many free models, and they might not be in the languages that you want. And if they are in the languages that you want, they might not work that well. They might be very generic models, right? So one way that you could think of is, like, to take these OpenNMT models and train them on your own data, uh, so that they work better, um, and they're your. So these models are not GPL governed, right? Like, it's not you have to put the models back in. Most of them are on MIT licenses, so you can actually keep using them in-house and keep them proprietary and not share them if you don't want to.
Very nice. Very nice. Thanks for that. So, to be honest, I cannot thank you enough for, sharing your knowledge, expertise, and most important, giving us the confidence that, look, I'm not an engineer, but still, I think we can do wonderful work using the technology that's available, especially in the language industry. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sandeep, for this closing remarks. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Sudhin. And just wanted to take one last opportunity to thank you, Kalika. I think it was really wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you.
Great knowing about a lot of concepts that I used, randomly and freely these days. And I hope we go back with some information and probably have more pertinent questions that will show us the path. So thank you once again. And
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining in, and good night and take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Good night and happy Diwali, everyone.
Happy
Yes.
Diwali to you all.
Stay
everyone.
safe and do not pollute.
And that's a very strong social message,
Yes.
especially in Delhi, like it's killing.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.